I graded the entire 2021 Baltimore Ravens draft class 4 years later. If you guys haven't been following along, I started this draft regrade series a few weeks ago. I've done the 24 class, 23, 22, and now the 2021 draft class. After coming off the 2022 draft class, this one is definitely a step down. I think that 2022 class was pretty special. We hit on a lot of picks. We got some franchise-changing guys like Kyle Hamilton hitting on Isaiah Likely in the 4th round, Travis Jones in the 3rd round. It was a standout class. This 2021 class was definitely not as good, but let's go through each pick and I'll give a grade as to where they're at right now. I'm pretty tough on the grades because I want to leave room for guys to grow into the A pluses and things like that. I don't want to just toss those out. I gave one to Kyle Hamilton, but haven't gave one to Nate Wiggins or Zay Flowers yet, even though I think they're well on their way. I just want to let the years play out a little bit before I'm just like tossing out the max possible grade, you know? So I was a little tougher on this draft class because there's no clear-cut A-plus type guy. And I think after coming off the 2022 class, I graded this one a little harder. But let's just dive into it. So with the first round pick at pick number 27, the Ravens selected Rashod Bateman, wide receiver from Minnesota. Now, Bateman entered the NFL with some pretty high expectations. Polished, versatile wide receiver, still is, but definitely had really high expectations coming in. His rookie season in 2021, he had a muscle injury, which delayed his debut until week 6. He ended up playing 12 games, had 46 catches, 515 yards, and a touchdown. In 2022, he had a foot injury, which limited him to 6 games. He only had 15 catches for 285 yards and 2 touchdowns, which really stunted the momentum coming off that rookie season. And then Bateman fought to get back in 2023. He appeared in 16 games, had 32 catches, 367 yards, and 1 touchdown. His production was low, but what made 2023 a positive for Rashod is he was able to get through a season healthy. You know, he was really struggling with that foot injury for a little bit. He had that injury his rookie season too, which delayed him into even getting onto the field. So his first 2 seasons was definitely struggling with injuries. 2023, he was able to at least stay on the field. And then in 2024, this past year, he had his breakout year. He had his productive year while also staying healthy. He had 45 catches, 756 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Bateman had career highs pretty much across the board, showed chemistry with Lamar, and finally looked like that first-round wide receiver that we thought we were getting right away out of Minnesota, but unfortunately he struggled with injuries. He ended up getting a contract extension with Baltimore before this past season, which turns out to be a steal. He definitely outproduced that contract already, and if Rashod stays on the field, I'm expecting even more production than last year. I think Rashod Bateman has a really high ceiling. He is a polished wide receiver. This was a good pick. If I was doing these grades last season, this pick would have had a totally different grade, probably kind of a negative outlook, not on Rashod really, just he wasn't staying on the field. He wasn't producing for the Ravens consistently. So I'm going to grade Rashod Bateman's draft pick as of right now a B+. That's just right now. I think he's well on his way into the A category. But for being a first-round pick, you know, our first-round pick, we have 2 coming up. We'll hit on that in a second. But Bateman was our first selection at the end of the first round, and we really didn't get, you know, top receiver Bateman until last year. So it took 3 full seasons for him to stay on the field and have consistent production. You know, some of that wasn't his fault. He wasn't being targeted the year before very much. Obviously, he can't control all the injuries. The first 2 seasons, he had a lot of injuries, so I'm not beating him up by any means. I love Bateman as a receiver. I love Bateman on this team as a Raven. I think his ceiling is very high. I think he's going to continue to ascend. But as of right now, I'm going to give it a B+. Moving on to the Ravens' second first-round pick. They did not have a second-round pick in this draft. They traded up back into the first round. So with pick 31 in the first round, the Ravens took Odafe Oweh, edge rusher from Penn State. Oweh was seen as a raw but super athletic pass rusher. He didn't have a ton of production in college, but had all the athleticism in the world, but really didn't have a ton of production until last year. Kind of the same story as Bateman, but without the injuries. And when the Ravens drafted Oweh, there was a lot of talk about how this might take time. He's new to football. He didn't have a lot of production at Penn State, so people weren't expecting him to immediately come into the Ravens and just start getting a ton of sacks out of nowhere. And that's kind of how it went. Just until this last season, his production was fairly low. We saw the athleticism. We saw a bunch of sacks that he almost had. But in 2021, he had 5 sacks. 2022, he went down and had 3 sacks. 2023, on the number 1 defense in the NFL, he had 5 sacks. And then this past year, 2024, he had his best season. He finally got the double-digit sacks, had 10 sacks, and clearly you can see the development of him becoming a more consistent, a better pass rusher, a pass rusher that thinks through moves and is not just relying on the speed and athleticism. He's also now packaging pass rush moves with that speed and athleticism. And I think Odafe Oweh is going to just continue to get better and better and better, like Bateman. Bateman had a different story because of the injuries. Odafe Oweh is newer to football and took a couple years, I think, to polish his game. And I don't think we've seen the best yet. He's getting there. In a couple years, I think Odafe Oweh is going to really enter his prime and become a really good pass rusher in the NFL. I don't know whether that'll be on the Ravens or not. They just picked up his 5th-year option. This is his final year of his contract that he's on right now. So whether the Ravens pay him his big second deal or not, we'll see. But as of now, we have Odafe Oweh heading into this 2025 season. He's our number 1 pass rusher, and I'm expecting an even better year than he just had. But to grade this pick, I'm going to also give this pick a B+. I think for a first-round pick to not have a lot of production, until 4 years in, it definitely lowers the grade a little bit, but the potential's there. Odafe Oweh's been a force. I think he is going to have a breakout year this season. He's newer to football, so I kind of graded that in too, I think Odafe Oweh, if he stays in Baltimore, is also on his way to increasing this draft grade into the A's, but it still took a few years, and you don't really want that from your first round pick. You kind of want your first round pick to come in and really lift the team and produce right away, kind of like we saw with Nate Wiggins last year, with Zay Flowers the year before that, with Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum. It seems like Rashod Bateman and Odafe Oweh, these first round picks took a little bit of time, but they are great players. They are working out. So they are solid picks, but I went with B+ because I didn't like how long it took. Moving on to the 3rd round, because like I said earlier, we traded our 2nd round pick to move up and get Odafe Oweh. So the 3rd round at pick number 94, we drafted Ben Cleveland, guard from Georgia. Ben Cleveland's a big lineman, 6'6", 340 pounds, was really drafted to eventually start at guard, at least by year 2 or 3. Most people with a 3rd round pick of a huge offensive guard, you expect them to start, and it has just never panned out that way. Ben Cleveland had a knee injury his rookie year, missed 5 weeks on IR, was struggling with some conditioning. He failed the conditioning test multiple times, was not really ever getting a lot of starts. He had 2 starts in 2022, was mainly a rotational guard behind Ben Powers, Kevin Zeitler. Ben Cleveland did get 6 starts in 2023. Wasn't terrible, but never really progressed. And then in 2024, with the guard situation wide open, most people were kind of slotting Ben Cleveland in to have a chance to start at one of those guard spots, but there were some center injuries, and the Ravens decided to put Ben Cleveland at backup center or starting center during the preseason and during training camp. And we really didn't see him play any guard in games ever again. He was just recently re-signed to the Ravens this offseason, so he's still on the roster. He has stuck around. It's not like his career has flopped, but he's been a backup for his entire career. And for a 3rd round pick, that's probably not how the Ravens saw this going. So I'm going to grade this draft pick a D. I think the Ravens really saw Ben Cleveland as a starter, a future starter, maybe not year 1, but definitely a future starter. You don't take a guard in the 3rd round when you need a guard and not expect them to develop into being the starter, especially someone with Cleveland's size. And for whatever reason, whether that's work ethic and practice, whether he got in the Harbaugh doghouse, there's a lot of theories out there as to why he's not starting or never really got a good shot, at least in games. So whatever reason that is, this draft pick just really hasn't panned out. I mean, a third-round pick ends up just being a rotational backup for his entire career with the Ravens. That obviously could change. Ben Cleveland takes a leap this offseason and this summer, ends up starting at left guard or something and has, turns things around, then that's why we're regrading these year after year, why these players are still playing. I have no problem increasing Ben Cleveland's grade to into the B's, But as we stand right now, it's a D just because he's not really playing for the Ravens, and we drafted him in the third round. That is an investment. Moving on to the Ravens' next third-round pick, they had another pick in the third round at pick 104, and that was Brandon Stephens, cornerback from SMU. Brandon Stephens was a former running back turned defensive back, played some safety for the Ravens early on. In 2021, he played all 17 games, stepped up as a free safety after the Ravens had some injuries. He ended up with 78 tackles. In 2022, he appeared in 15 games, had 36 tackles. In 2023, Stephens really solidified what position he was going to play in his role with the Ravens and excelled in 2023, was our top corner, played in 16 games, 71 tackles, 11 pass breakups, 2 interceptions, really emerged opposite of Ronald Darby that year. We had some injuries with Marlon Humphrey, and Brandon Stephens was playing a huge role for the Ravens' success on defense in 2023. But then we move on to 2024. This past year, he did play all season again. He's been healthy, he's been reliable, but struggled in pass coverage and was being picked on, was viewed as one of the Ravens' worst corners this year, and kind of got exposed at the cornerback position. Nate Wiggins and Marlon Humphrey were playing incredible, and teams were consistently going at Brandon Stephens. The fan base kind of flipped on him, and his career trajectory with Baltimore really took a turn, because in 2023, we'd have looked at this Brandon Stephens pick in the third round and gave it an A- or a very high grade. Brandon Stephens was looking like a reliable piece to the Ravens, and then this past year took a major step back and now is not even on the Ravens. He was a free agent this offseason and ended up signing a $12 million deal with the Jets. So wishing Brandon Stephens well, but it didn't work out in Baltimore, and this grade definitely turned. If I was doing this last year, I would have had a way better grade. But as it stands right now, since he's not on the Ravens anymore, his Ravens career has ended, at least so far, I'm going to grade this pick a C+. And I know some people might be harder on him than that. It was a third-round pick, so decent investment. But I thought Brandon Stephens did give us a lot of great minutes. For a third-round pick, it's not like we had to wait years for him to start producing. He was finding roles right away. We need a safety. There he is. He's a decent safety. We need outside corner help now. Okay, well, he can do that too. He's just learning multiple positions on the defense. And then in 2023, the year that he gave us on defense, I think really, really helped the Ravens. The Ravens defense would have not been as good as it was. We were number one in every single category. The pass rush was humming. The whole entire defense with Mike McDonald was balling, and Brandon Stephens was our most reliable corner that year because Marlon Humphrey was hurt. We got Ronald Darby out there with Brandon Stephens, and they were balling. So the fact that Brandon Stephens throughout his career did give the Ravens a lot of solid minutes doesn't tank this grade, but we are left with a bit of a sour taste in our mouth after watching how everything played out last year, and now he's not even on the team anymore. So I ended up grading this a C+. Moving on to the fourth round at pick 131, the Ravens selected Tylan Wallace, wide receiver from Oklahoma State. Tylan Wallace at this pick was regarded as a potential steal. I mean, a lot of people were saying that he should have went a lot higher than this, and he's had some great moments with the Ravens, but he really hasn't found a consistent starting role at receiver. In 2021, he played 8 games. He had 2 catches for 23 yards. He was mainly on special teams. 2022, he appeared in 9 games. He had 4 catches for 33 yards. Once again, mainly excelling and playing on special teams. 2023, he played in 11 games, had 7 catches for 67 yards, had a knee injury which hampered a little bit of his playing time. Still played a ton on special teams, ended up having a huge moment to win the game against the Rams where he returned a punt for a touchdown. So that was one of his career-defining moments. And then in 2024, he played in 15 games, 8 catches for 91 yards and a touchdown. First career score ever on offense. And that touchdown was a long grab against the Bengals where it was down the same exact sideline that he had that punt return touchdown for the win. And that Bengals game was back and forth. Tylan Wallace's touchdown in that game did help the Ravens win that game. So he's definitely had some big moments and has helped the Ravens out, but has mainly been a special teams contributor. Outside of that one touchdown on the sideline against the Bengals last year, Tylan Wallace hasn't made a ton of splash plays on offense throughout his entire career. He did also re-sign this offseason, so Tylan Wallace is back, and his story is still being written. But for now, I'm going to grade this pick a C+. Moving on to the 5th round at pick 160, the Ravens took Shaun Wade, cornerback from Ohio State. Now, Shaun Wade was supposed to be a top pick. He was a slot corner in 2019 and was regarded as one of the best corners in the draft. But then in 2020, he got moved to outside corner. He struggled a bit, and that moved his draft stock down. So the Ravens took a shot on him in the 5th round, but it really just never worked out. In 2021, he struggled in camp. Played just 3 games, recorded 1 tackle, and then got traded to the Patriots in August for a 2022 7th round pick and a 2023 5th rounder. And then in New England, he appeared in 3 games in 2021, mostly on special teams. 2022, same thing. 2023, played 6 games for the Patriots, battled a bunch of injuries, was released in 2024, joined the Rams practice squad, played 2 games for them, but has just not been able to recapture his college form and has been bouncing between teams as a depth piece trying to stay on a practice squad. I was going to give this pick an F, but I am going to go D- just because of the trade return. You know, I wouldn't argue if somebody wanted to grade this pick an F. It clearly did not work out. But the Ravens did get a 7th rounder and a future 5th rounder, so they kind of got their pick back. But regardless, this obviously was not a great pick, and it didn't work out for the Ravens. Moving on to the next pick in the 5th round at pick 171, the Ravens took Daelin Hayes, edge rusher from Notre Dame. Daelin's career was derailed by injuries. 2021, he played 1 game, had a shoulder injury that ended the season. 2022, he appeared in 2 games, recorded 1 tackle before getting waived, and then ended up joining the 49ers practice squad. Hayes ended up signing with the Texans, played in 3 games with them, bounced to the Falcons practice squad, but through 4 years, he's only had 3 tackles in 7 games and has just not been able to stay healthy or secure any type of consistent role. I'm going to grade this draft pick an F. I think that this was one that had some promise initially. You know, there was some hype that Daelin Hayes would be a rotational edge rusher at least, but struggle with injuries and then quickly wasn't even on the team. Never really found a role or played any type of consistent minutes. And for a 5th round pick, I got to give this an F. Moving on to the Ravens' last pick in this draft, which was also in the 5th round at pick 184, they took Ben Mason, tight end / fullback from Michigan. Ben Mason was a hybrid player, tight end, fullback, didn't really have a position, but you know, that kind of made sense for the Ravens to take. And in 2021, he was cut after camp, but he ended up re-signing to the Ravens practice squad. He appeared in 1 game. In 2022, he signed with the Bears, played in 1 game with them, then returned to the Ravens practice squad, was released in 2023, ended up joining the Chargers, played 2 games with them, and then ended up being with the 49ers practice squad in 2024. But through 4 seasons, he's only played 4 games and has struggled to stay on any roster, really. So being a 5th round pick, someone that's really never even played for the Ravens, I'm going to also grade this draft pick an F. The 5th round picks in this draft class were not good at all. It could be 3 straight Fs. And that rounds out the 2021 draft class regrades. Like I said in the intro, definitely not the best draft. You know, coming off of that 2022 class, I guess I was having some high expectations, and then to relive this 2021 class and go back and visit, all the picks, I don't think this was a strong draft. I think that it's carried by Rashod Bateman and Oweh's recent production. So definitely high on their futures. What the seasons that they had last year gives me a lot of promise that they can potentially save this draft class. But Ben Cleveland in the third round, not really working out. Brandon Stevens didn't really end up working out. I know he gave us some solid minutes. That's why I didn't completely, lower that grade, but he's not on the team anymore. Didn't really work out long term. Tylan Wallace, special teams role. Never really found a starting role at receiver. The receiving room's getting pretty crowded. We'll see if he can step up or, every one of these players still writing their careers for the most part. But then that fifth round of Shaun Wade, Daelin Hayes, Ben Mason, none of those picks worked out at all for the Ravens or in the NFL in general. It's not like, didn't work out for the Ravens, but they excelled on some other team like Darren Waller or something. No one found a role on any other team. So those are 3 fifth-round picks that just didn't even make it in the league. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are about this draft class. Was I too harsh? I felt a little harsh after this. I was like, am I being negative? I don't want to be negative ever. I'm not a negative person, and I know I'm grading kind of hard. I'm definitely not tossing out A's easily, but I felt like I was grading this class a little harsh, but let me know what you guys are thinking. What grades would you give to everyone and why? And appreciate you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game take us out.
Ravens Flock. The Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.